I'm speaking with Kathy Parker, and before we go into what we're going to talk about or what you do, would you give them your name and contact information for those who would like to speak with you later?
Sure. My name is Kathy Parker. My phone number is 801-671-1315. My website is creatingchangecounseling.com, and my email address is kathy@creatingchangecounseling.com.
Thank you.
Yes.
You know, for a website with that's that long, it's probably pretty hard not to misspell it.
Yes.
So that's a good one. Sometimes you go, wow. So Creating Change Counseling.
Yes.
What are we going to talk about today? Well, before we do that, actually, what's your background?
Sure. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a therapist with a private practice, and the name of my business is Creating Change because I enjoy working with adults who are seeking change in their lives. Common themes for reasons why people initiate counseling with me include developing healthy relationships, accepting the elements of life that are inflexible, and working towards healing from the parts of life that are difficult.
What do you find people that are going through or have been through a divorce benefit most from their work with you?
Sure, that's a great question. So one thing that I think is important to take into consideration is often when going through a divorce, it's not just your relationship with your spouse that is affected. It is your relationship with your friends, with your family of origin, with your in-laws, if you have children, of course, the family that you've created. And often there can be difficulties and transitions in all of these relationships. So one benefit to coming to counseling is having a place where there is a stable relationship that is judgment-free, where you're really allowed to explore and encouraged to explore, you know, who you want to be and how you want to take this life transition and create what you want out of it.
Let me do something a little disruptive right at the beginning.
Sure.
What if I am afraid that my ex is going to get a hold of your records and my sessions with you? And what if I really am bearing my soul or dealing with some real difficulties, or anger toward my ex or my kids, or dealing with my alcohol or substance abuse demons that you're not treating me for that, but I'm talking to you
Sure.
about them. How do I protect myself from other people finding out about this?
That's a great question. So in counseling, everything is confidential. By law, I actually would not even be allowed to tell somebody whether or not you're my client. Of course, there are potential safety issues that if they were to arise, I'm required by law to report. But those are very extreme cases. Disclosing things like,
I'm angry with my ex-wife.
Right, absolutely.
I don't want people to know that I tried a bunch of drugs, cocaine and heroin, and smoked pot for the first time while I was going through a difficult period in my life.
Sure. Yes, counseling is a very safe place to explore those kinds of issues, and there's no way that I would ever be able to share that information with
I thought
anybody
about
else.
suicide, but I have joint custody. Is that going to make me lose my kids?
Right.
Things like that.
Exactly. All of that would be confidential.
Sometimes people ask me, then they're like, I don't do this because I'm afraid that it'll leave a paper trail or something that will burn me later. And that's a great concern. I mean, you're wise to wonder about that, but it's
Sure.
good to know that that's safe.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great question.
Along those lines, if somebody uses your services as a benefit of their employment or the insurance benefits they have, there will be records of the fact that you've been retained for services and you've been paid money, correct?
Yes.
So if somebody wants to make sure there's no paper trail, can they just pay cash?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So some people choose to use their insurance, but there are plenty of people who choose not to use insurance.
Some people use insurance because they say, I'm not afraid to admit that I spoke to Kathy. It's like it was making me a better person or something like that. Others, and I know people specifically, who just feel like it's not that I am embarrassed by it, but I just don't want it to come up and be used against me as some kind of a sword instead of the shield that was intended. So I think it's good to know, and it was something I didn't, that you can just come in and it's really just, it's a cash transaction and there's really no record other than the fact that you report the income, but you don't have to say where it came from.
Exactly. I can't say where it came from, to be honest. I cannot give a name.
So knowing that now, and again, she did not know I was going to ask her this question, but that's what I like to do. I do that with everybody.
Yes.
Because I find that if it's prepared too much, it's almost like you're giving a slideshow.
Sure.
So I appreciate you just taking this as they come.
Yes.
Now that we know about that, and it's kind of, maybe you've had this vicarious experience of like, oh, I'm so relieved. Now, Kathy, tell me what you can do for people and what benefits you've seen from counseling.
Sure, that's a great question. So, some benefits that I've seen from counseling in regards to divorce and going through a divorce is really looking at this time in your life as a time of transition. And I think that there are transitions in life that are more like milestones that we plan for, that we hope for, that we expect. And I think for a lot of people, getting married is one of those transitions. And it isn't typical to get married with the intention of getting divorced. And so the life transition of divorce can bring with it a new set of challenges and a new set of opportunities at the same time.
Have you met someone that came to you and said, yeah, you know, I plan to get married and then I plan to get divorced? Have you ever met anybody that actually said that?
No, I've never met anybody who said that.
I have. It was a woman that wanted to get married, have a baby, and then leave the husband.
Mm-hmm.
She was a psychopath, but yeah, that's anyway. I didn't mean to get off topic.
No, that's okay. So in terms of some of the benefits of counseling, I think that it can be really helpful to have a strong and stable source of support when you're going through these challenges, when you're trying to figure out, you know, what part of this do you need to just accept and what part do you want to work on and change. You know, during divorce, I think that is a great opportunity to take a step back and evaluate where you've been, evaluate where you'd like to go, and kind of take the opportunity to potentially redefine yourself.
If I'm going through a divorce and feeling pretty down on most everything in life, mm-hmm. doesn't that, what do you say to someone who's like, that's kind of Pollyanna to think that it's I mean, not everything's an opportunity, is it?
Sure, that's a good point.
I'm not trying to lead you in one direction, but mm-hmm. is it or is it not? I mean,
that's a good question. So I agree that it would be Pollyanna to think that it's only an opportunity and that it would just be rainbows from here on out. But I think that in order to take advantage of the opportunity, we also need to work through the struggles. We need to work through the challenges. We need to work through the heartbreak and the grief and the change in relationships and potentially the change in roles. It's possible that you are now a single parent, or it's possible that you were potentially a stay-at-home parent and now you are looking at joining the workforce. It's possible that you want to move, you know, your geographical location. So yeah, there are plenty of challenges.
Do you deal with people that have lost loved ones?
Yes.
So let's kind of compare that a little bit to, because we talked about the stages of grief, and I want to make sure I did not confuse this with stages of grief, because that's a different subject for a different conversation. But, you know, some people lose a child, mm-hmm. and they're miserable for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. Other people lose a child, and they won't say, well, I've put that behind me, but yet they're able to live a truly happy life. Sure. What is that difference? The pain is no worse for either one of them. Let's mm-hmm. just assume for this hypothetical, and both of them were devastated, both of them wept bitterly. But one person is able to move on, the other person, and nobody would begrudge them their grief.
Sure.
But it ruins their lives. They start to drink, or their marriage unravels, mm-hmm. or maybe none of that happens, but they're just not the same person. Mm-hmm. And it's a change for the worse. What is the difference? Do you know what that is between those kinds of people? Somebody who gets divorced and becomes bitter and reclusive, and someone who gets divorced and actually, if not maintains a good life and outlook, actually improves. What's the difference?
Sure, that's a good point. So I think that grief can affect us all in different ways. and it can affect the same person in different ways at different stages of their life. And some things to take into consideration are, you know, what are your supports already? Do you have people in your life who are encouraging and who are supportive and who are helping you through this time? Or do you feel quite alone and isolated? Have you had experiences of trauma in your past? Have you experienced repeated trauma? In which case, each new trauma is more and more difficult to recover from, versus in general having a rather healthy life, feeling like you're in control, feeling like you're empowered to make your life what it is that you want it to be.
Let me ask, are you saying that is this just something that some people deal with, or does everybody have a harder time dealing with repeated trauma?
I would say that everybody.
Everybody does. So it's not like you can become like a good trauma sufferer? You can't get skilled at that?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm not sure if you can be a good trauma sufferer, but I do think that there are things that we can do to make ourselves more resilient to trauma.
I was really interested by that. You're saying that people that suffer repeated traumas, it's harder. They can overcome them,
Certainly.
but it doesn't get easier. It gets harder.
I think
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed.
Sure, it can, and it also depends on how we respond to each trauma. So each time we do experience something that's difficult, do we take that opportunity to evaluate? Do we engage in self-care? Do we make sure that we are surrounding ourselves with healthy people, that we're taking care of ourselves, that we're feeling like we're in control? If we do, then we're setting ourselves up for the next difficult situation in life, because we know that there will be another one at some point.
What kind of skills do you find people that are suffering unduly from divorce share? Or I should say that they can have. What are the traits that you see people that are not recovering from divorce in what we might call a normal period or a normal manner? What is it that what are they doing wrong? What are they suffering? What are their mindset problems? And then what do you do to help them, or what do you find that's helpful for many? Obviously, not everything works. Maybe there is something that works for every single person, but there's not going to be one thing that cures or remedies the problem.
Sure.
So what do you see people suffering from that holds them back?
Sure, that's a good question. So what can really hold someone back and keep them stuck? Mm-hmm. Is that what you're asking?
And are there gender differences in that too?
Oh, that's a good question. So let me first talk about some patterns of people who struggle in terms of moving forward. And I would say that is, holding on to anger, of course. And even if you think that divorce is absolutely the best decision for you at this time, and you're on board and you want to move forward, there still are going to be feelings of grief and anger and hurt. And I would say that kind of staying stuck there, staying stuck in the memories, kind of staying stuck in wanting to rehash things with your partner.
I laugh because I participate in several Facebook groups for people that have they're going through or gone through divorce, and we all know who those people are, that they will not stop talking about the same couple of incidents or the injustice and unfairness. Now, granted, that happened, but do they really have to relive it every single day?
Sure. That's a good question. And in terms of counseling, that can be a place to talk about some of the same issues, because as you said, whether it's a Facebook group or our friends or our family, sometimes people want to say enough is enough. I've heard that story. I know what
Friends,
he did. I know
family,
what she said.
Facebook. Every now and then we'll just say, hey, if you keep telling us this story about how the guardian ad litem took your child away,
right,
we're gonna throw you out.
Right.
You're just draining us.
Sure. And there are ways to kind of tell this story in a way that is productive, where you're really processing and you're moving forward. But sometimes it takes the help of a professional to make it productive, instead of just being a hamster on a wheel and being stuck in the same place.
Excellent image. How do you help people with that?
Well, that's a great question. So there are lots of different ways of healing through difficulties, healing through different traumas.
And do you talk to somebody to see what you think those are, or do you kind of like to start with one thing and see if that works and then move on to something else, or is it a combination of those things? Like, so if you're talking to me and you can see I'm on the hamster wheel, but you say, okay, well, he's a middle-aged man who suffered not just the divorce, but also the loss of the relationship with his kid. I mean, do you do that and then say, now I think I would suggest he do these things or those things? Or do you say, I suggest that everybody at least start with this?
That's a great question.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. And it's a little bit of both. So everybody's different, and everybody needs a different approach. And so in terms of the big picture, I definitely use different methods with different people. And when we work together, I don't necessarily think that I'm the teacher and I'm the knower. We work together, client and therapist, to decide what it is that works and what's effective.
A good thing, something I've learned in the course of talking with people like Kathy, is that you don't see yourself as the keeper of knowledge.
Right.
You don't see yourself as flawless, but you're saying, yeah, I do know certain things you don't. Sure. And I help you in that regard, but I'm exploring this with you, using my expertise and my background to help guide you, but surely not by saying I have all the answers. You're helping them find the answers with you. Exactly.
Guide is a great word to use. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So getting back to your other question in terms of is there anything that is universal? Is there anything that that I do share with most clients, that I do encourage? And yes, I would say that self-care is the number one. And self-care is rather broad, but it pretty much means what it sounds like. It means that we all need to take care of ourselves. And if we're not taking care of ourselves on a daily basis, it is certainly difficult to go through the process of therapy. Because that can be challenging. And self-care includes surrounding yourself with healthy people. It includes making sure you're sleeping at night and you're awake during the day. You're eating your meals, you're drinking water, you're exercising, and engaging in healthy relationships.
It all sounds so overwhelming. I've already been through all this, and now I live in this storage unit and on a cinder block bed, and you're telling me I haven't exercised for years.
Right.
So, is there something what kind of encouragement or hope could you offer to somebody who says, yes, I hear what you're saying, and I like what you're saying, and it makes sense, but don't ask me to get out of bed and go to the gym. What do you say to somebody like that?
Sure. So I say that there's a spectrum. You don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. and hike Mount Olympus before you go to work. You can come home from work and stretch for 15 minutes before you eat dinner. You can, before you go to bed, you can listen to a guided meditation on your iPod. That
sounds kind of frou-frou. I'm kind of a more practical, feet on the ground kind of person, Kathy. I mean, what are you suggesting? I give it a shot?
Yes, I'm suggesting you have an open mind.
As am I. I'm not a therapist. But what's the worst that can happen, folks? You've already been through an experience you did not. What was it? There are things that you as a transition you did not plan for.
Right.
Well, you're not equipped to know. You know what a marriage is like. You had married parents. At least a lot of people did. You saw married people. You saw divorced people. But you saw married people. You grew up in a family, no matter how dysfunctional. But a divorce, if your parents didn't divorce, and even if they did, it's not the same thing. So why not try the meditation? If it turns out to be just as flaky and weird as you thought it was, then don't do it.
Exactly.
But I can tell you personally that there's a lot of things that, and it's because of Michael Crichton's autobiography, the guy that wrote Jurassic Park. You might find it very useful. But I mean, I'm not suggesting that I need to experiment with drugs to find out if drugs are bad. But meditation, the worst that can happen is I might feel it was a waste of time. But if it really could help with coping with divorce better, what do you have to lose? If you hate exercise, as do I, what's the worst that can happen by trying to stretch for 15 minutes or taking a walk around the block for 20 minutes?
Sure.
And I can tell you this, that one of those things is going to click with you, and you might say, yes, I expected it to, and it did, but quite often it's the thing you least expected.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. And sometimes there is some trial and error. And so, okay, well, here are 10 healthy things that I want to try to incorporate in my lifestyle. I'm going to give them a try. And I walked away with 4 of them being realistic. Well, great. If you have 4 healthy coping skills as part of your daily or weekly routine, then I'd say you're doing pretty well.
You're 4 things ahead of where you were.
Right, exactly.
What, in wrapping up, what excites you most? What's the kind of person you like to work with the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what excites me the most is people who are interested in inventing the life that they desire. And I think that at different points of our lives, we can just take inventory and say, okay, this is the life that I want for myself. This is where I want to be. And this is where I am right now. Okay, well, how far is this gap? At different stages of life, our gap is going to be further or shorter. And so I am excited about working with people who are looking at that evaluation and who are thinking about, the steps that they can take to make that gap as short as possible.
How long have you been doing this?
I have been a therapist for over 10 years.
Great. Thank you so much. And it just shows in the way that you talk about the subject matter that you really like it. Again, give them your name and contact information for those who would like to get in touch with you later.
Sure, great. Again, my name is Kathy Parker. I'm an LCSW. My phone number is 801-671-1315. My website is creatingchangecounseling.com, and my email is kathy@creatingchangecounseling.com.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.